We are recording. It is November 11. We've got lots to get through, actually, but I think this will be a relatively quick meeting. Um, First, I wanted to go through our V1 Alpha 1 blockers and milestone. The blockers themselves seem very limited now, thanks to everyone for getting these figured out. I believe these two are closely related, and when Harry's PR merges here, we'll have gotten all of our blockers taken care of. And this one feels awfully close. I haven't looked at it in the past hour, but I know there was just a bit of feedback left from Danian and myself. But awfully close, I think. So yeah, thank you, Harry. This is awesome. You've done some great work to make these docs 1,000 times better. So yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Right. And I think that's all that actually blocks us. So I can't imagine a world where we don't release an alpha a week from today, if not sooner. With that said, I think we, by focusing on everything that was blocking V1 alpha, we may not have done enough to focus on things that would certainly be nice to have. And so if we look at the V1 Alpha 1 milestone here, there are a few things that could potentially be improved on. And so maybe we can, and I know we kind of looked at these last time, but if you focus on the priority important soon bits of V1 Alpha 1, I think these are certainly nice to haves. And if there, and I know Rich, you're already working on one of these, it would be awesome if we could get this one in. I think you messaged me just before this. You had a bit more you wanted to talk about on this PR.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. I just dropped in the chat a link to the and really, I guess, Harry, I wanted to make sure we were on the same page. It seemed like we had not reached an agreement on the conflict resolution. Yep, that's it right there. Perfect.
Oh, sorry.
So I guess I just wasn't sure what we wanted to use if we weren't going to use this tie-breaking semantic, that the specific being the route timestamp, like order of add.
Yeah, so this came up before as well. And if this is regarding like if paths collide, right? I'm trying to recall the context around this comment.
Yeah, let me open up the full diff.
Yeah, sorry, I actually made a mistake on my patches here. So it's like coming in two different ones. So in the future, that'll be cleaner, but thanks,
no
Rob.
worries.
The order, right? Okay. So must be determined. Yeah, so we discussed, it's if you have to actually implement like, timestamp based collision, I'm not sure how one would implement that. Like if like two routes are exactly the same, or you can have some collision detection algorithm which tells you they are same, then you can do based on timestamp or based on namespace plus name combination names and whatever ordering we want. But once you configure these things inside a proxy or inside any implementation, it's not possible to figure out which one takes priority.
Sure, I guess.
Right.
Oh, go ahead, Rob.
Go ahead.
Well, I guess I was just going to say I was thinking that the control plane would be making that decision, not necessarily like the data plane aspect, not to get too implementation specific, but the way I read it at least was that the tie-breaking semantics were for the purpose of driving the controller's writes down into the data plane, not necessarily that the data plane would be responsible for implementing those timestamps on its side.
Yeah, that matched my expectation as well. And I think this kind of sounded like what you were saying as well, Harry, that in the controller itself, you could detect these kind of collisions and control what you actually wrote or configured on the data plane.
Yeah, in that case, yeah, that can work. It gets tricky with path-based matching, right? And path prefix-based matching, where I mean, it's technically possible. But it's not something that everyone always implements. So, if that's the case, I think we should just clarify that part, and then we can add this. But we probably need to add that part to. I'll need to go back and check because we removed the timestamp based ordering or namespace based ordering for paths, I think, in some area of the API documentation. I don't remember that offhand, but I'll take a look.
Yeah, and so I can see how part of this could get confusing because we're saying the longest. So I think we have said in previous discussion that we want the longest matching host name followed by longest matching path as two separate tiebreakers. So assuming that's a host name specified on HTTP route, I guess that's all very possible within the controller. You can dedupe on host. Well, you can kind of do merging. I don't know what the appropriate term is there, but you can write logic, although it may be complex, to get it completely right.
Yeah, I see that point. I mean, we could also have like a shared library that all controllers could share for these things.
Yeah.
So yeah. So okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Yeah, Rob, thanks for the guidance here. I guess what I'll do then is if we're all set on that as a mechanism, just clean up, some of these nits and comments and squash and get this going. So might make it.
Yeah, great. It would be awesome to have this in as part of V1 Alpha 1. I think this, if I run back to our actual milestone, if I can find it, yeah, whatever. I think that may be the last one left, even in our nice to have list that could potentially, no, I guess this one would. Yeah, I guess these all could potentially result in small changes within the types file. So these are not just documentation related. Yeah, okay. So if anyone does want to volunteer on these, just feel free to assign yourself. It would be great to get some of these knocked out, especially, as we're trying to limit any potential changes to Go types after a V1 Alpha 1 launch. Getting some of these nice to haves in the next week would be great. And obviously documentation we can continue to add and improve as we go.
Hey, Rod, can you take that link and just pop it into the chat window so I have it up in front of me? And I'll try to take on one of these before the end of the week.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
Cool. All right, that is all we had on the blockers and milestone. And I think that leads us into, Damian, you had a question around conformance tests and what exactly that's going to look like.
Yeah, it hasn't been something that we've discussed in quite some time. And as we start planning through the implementation, things like tests and CI and all that stuff kind of came up as a discussion topic. And that brought me back to this. And so I just wanted to kind of bring it up again and kind of see where does this lie in our list of priorities and what are some of the actionable steps that we can potentially outline. So maybe we could start to move forward in this area. I don't know, what does everyone else think about conformance tests?
Yeah, they're critically important, I think, after we cut V1 Alpha 1. It is an interesting repo that exists today already for the conformance. There are some good things about it. There's some kind of little bit fiddly things about it. But one nice thing is that the current approach in the ingress controller conformance includes a cucumber-like description of the behavior, which I found to be pretty nice if we can lay it out like this.
And so would the conformance test live in service APIs or similar to this ingress controller conformance, it would be a separate repo?
Yeah, I don't know if we can like vendor this and then just use the code to just get started. The reason it lived in a separate area was that there is actually no repo for ingress itself. So it had to be a third-party repo anyways.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so in this area, I mean, should we just, if someone starts to move forward with this, would this person just kind of look at the ingress controller conformance and kind of use that as a reference model for creating the conformance test for service APIs?
That would be my advice as like the first step, and then figure out if there's anything that doesn't work with the controller conformance, and at that point, probably fix both to make it work.
Yeah. And I do agree with Bowie that this thing is that conformance tests, I feel the same as Bowie, that the conformance tests are critical after V1 Alpha 1. Rob and others, if you feel the same, should we go ahead and tag this as, I forget what that tag is, soon to be, or, I forget the name of the tag that we're using for something that we should work on here in the near future.
Yeah, we could potentially give this a priority at least. I don't know which milestone to attach this to, but like you say, this is probably important soon. But I don't know that it necessarily belongs, like this is something that we probably won't start in very serious work until V1 Alpha 1 actually launches.
Right.
But it is kind of the very, very high on the list after V1 Alpha 1 launches. I think in my mind, our highest priorities after Wednesday, after that launch, are going to be improving documentation, getting feedback, and writing conformance tests. So in no particular order. And I think that given that, I've personally set aside, I think probably a couple weeks or maybe a bit more to actually spend work trying to help and contribute to conformance testing in the next couple months. So that's definitely something I want to help out with as well. And I appreciate you bringing this up, because I think this really does need to be, top of mind as we're going forward.
Cool. Great. I think that's great. That's just, we're all on the same page there, it sounds like, so that's good.
Yep, for sure. One question here, just I guess more of a logistical thing. I can see a fairly strong argument for writing conformance tests within the service APIs repo to keep everything kind of standardized, keep the same set of reviewers, maintainers, etc. On the other hand, I can see some kind of value, especially if we're going to try and use a similar pattern to trying to help out the people working on ingress controller conformance. It does seem like there would be some level of overlap. And I can imagine maybe this is too far of a stretch, but I can imagine the same implementations might be conformant with both the ingress API and service APIs at some point.
Yeah, we can always rename the repo.
Right.
So that's not the major blocker.
So is this the kind of thing where it would be distracting to have all those tests in the same place?
I don't think so.
Or would it? Okay. So do we have a strong preference then as far as keeping our own conformance tests within this repo, or starting work or starting to contribute to the conformance repo.
So the only issue is that the current thing is not stable. So you have something that's not stable mixed in with something that's completely stable. It's mostly will this get confusing for people kind of question. You'll end up having to vendor things back and forth, which might be kind of annoying.
What's the current? I guess I'm confused by this Ingress controller conformance point to begin with. Like, they're not in the pattern that's being used by like the service v1 and like network policy conformance tests. Is that the issue?
Oh, so this is like it's like a trial to see if you can click through. Actually, Rob, if you're sharing your screen, like you can click through to see it's not under test, it's under features. So like this is what the test actually looks like, which is kind of nice. I wouldn't say that the existing Kubernetes conformance suites are all together that friendly. And we did discuss this with the SIG Arch conformance group. And basically they came, we were asking like, hey, is there a recommendation for doing this? Like you should be doing using some blessed framework. And the basic feedback was that the existing framework, which is based on Ginkgo, is not, like, people aren't super happy with it. And the other thing was that they actually came to the conclusion they wouldn't be very opinionated about the framework to be used. And then there was some pointing to this BDD style framework for the Ingress conformance. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's why this thing exists and sort of uses a BDD style way to test things.
No, that's perfect. And I guess just for clarity, the repository and contribution activity that Rob was asking about is on this repo we're looking at here, like alongside these folks.
Yeah, it would be basically if we should contribute our conformance tests here, or if we should keep them and work on them inside our own service APIs repo.
I think someone just needs to go and scope it out, because as I was saying before, like if we had the actual test here, then we would have to vendor from service APIs every time a change happens into here, versus vendoring the framework from here into service APIs. Like which one is more stable versus less stable?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like it may end up being, and this needs more research, but it may end up being simplest to use this pattern, but keep it in our own repo and investigate as our API stabilizes. We can investigate merging these together. But I don't know. That's just my first guess. But maybe if anyone does want to dig a little deeper into exactly how these might integrate, that could be valuable as well.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
my feeling so far. Just gotta like find out more before I have an opinion.
Yep.
But thanks for the explanation. That's helpful.
Yeah, and I think one other little detail, like the reason these tests aren't in upstream, they're not in K/K, is because obviously controllers and like this is conformance testing for the controllers, and we actually have Ingress conformance tests in upstream, but they're really basic. It's just does the API server allow creation, deletion, etc. of an Ingress resource or Ingress class, or and these very basic things. But these tests are focused more on the implementation of the API, which is similar in concept to what we'd be doing with service APIs as well. We'd be focusing on implementations of the API, which is a strange detail. We have like multiple levels of conformance in Kubernetes or in this ecosystem, but that's So there is definitely some overlap with what this is doing and what we're thinking about doing here, I think. But whether or not that means they all belong in the same repository, I'm not sure. Okay, I'll keep on moving here. It looks like Danian, yeah, I moved your other thing up because this looks like it's highly worthwhile. I don't know. Links to comments in docs don't always work very well. Okay, it did work. Great. Yeah, go ahead, Danian. You probably have more context.
Yeah, and if you could pull up the chat window and click on the link that I just gave you, because this is really the kind of the background of the issue that that I'm getting feedback on internally from people, including Clayton Coleman. You see his name there. And so, you know, when we created the Route API, we made the conscious decision to represent TLS assets within the TLS config of the route, because the concern is giving access to controllers to be able to read secrets across all namespaces. There's a lot of concerns there with that. And so I'm getting that same kind of feedback again with the latest review, that API review that I shared of that document internally within Red Hat. So I just wanted to kind of bubble that back up to the team and see if it's worth discussing again, or you know, what kind of just what people's thoughts are.
How do you have any way of limiting, since in a world where you allow for cross namespace certificate references, how do you define which gateway or which resource can use those certificates?
Trying to understand your question. So,
Sorry. So I think, and I may be misunderstanding this, but it sounds like what you're describing is there's a desire for organizations to drop all certificates into a single, more secure namespace, and then have their resources reference those certificates.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, so what we do with HTTP route, and I think maybe with some of the other APIs, is right. We've got the certificate reference. So the certificate materials aren't part of the HTTP route, and so they will most likely reside in a secret that could be in the same namespace. But because these routes can be across different namespaces, essentially, the controller that's reconciling all these routes needs to be able to have read access of secrets across all the namespaces. And that's where the concern is, right? Is giving a controller the ability to read secrets across all the different namespaces. And, I provided feedback of, okay, here's some potential workarounds, like with the route bindings, create a gateway that only allows routes in the same namespace to bind, therefore secrets will be in the same namespace, and then the controller would be configured to only read secrets from that namespace. But then that becomes pretty limiting. And there was discussion around the using a webhook, and then there was concerns of scale about webhooks, all this kind of stuff. And so
I have a question. Where would you put the secret in this case?
It would be part of the route. So instead of having a cert ref in the HTTP route, we would have fields like certificate and key that would, the developer.
So you would actually drop the secret as part of the route object itself?
Yeah.
That seems.
But I know a secret has some
secure.
properties that help us. I'm sorry, go ahead, say that again.
Isn't that less secure than it'd be in plain text in just config?
No, I think he's talking about the route would reference the secret, not the gateway. But it would still be a route, like it would still be a reference of a secret. Am I understanding that correctly?
But does that solve anything? Because at the end of the day, you end up having a controller that has to go and read something that potentially is in a different namespace. And that's what I'm hearing as the issue.
Yeah, I mean, the core of the issue is having a controller that would need the ability to read secrets across all namespaces.
So it's not that it has to read this particular secret, it's that it has to read, it could read other secrets because we don't have, but don't we have,
Exactly.
we have RBAC on like specific objects? We don't have that.
Right.
I mean, you
so
could.
we can't necessarily just say, okay, we'll give you access to, or maybe there's some way we can, but you know, the RBAC rules for the controller is going to be, okay, read access for secrets for all namespaces, right? I mean, we can't.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's some way to
You
limit
need- you need
that.
Yeah, the other limitation is you need to watch for secrets because you need to know when the secret changes. And for a watch permission, you need read access to all the resources in that specific namespace or cluster wide.
So one concern I'd have as far as an API is kind of going the other direction. If we allow secrets to be referenced in arbitrary namespaces, so if we add a namespace to certificate ref as an example, that opens up another potential security concern, which is that you need to be able to control, you probably don't want a gateway and namespace Y to be able to grab a secret from any other namespace. You might want to have some limitations on what certificates they can use. In some cases, maybe not this specific case. If I'm understanding your specific case correctly, I'm wondering if there's a middle ground that can be accomplished with our existing API. And if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like what you want is all secrets to be in a single namespace that the controller can reference. And maybe that is some controller level configuration. And maybe we expand our spec to suggest that some controllers may not interpret this as being the local namespace, but instead may interpret it as being the namespace configured for the controller for certificates.
Yeah, but then that means that people can put into that namespace and then they can overwrite other people's secrets. It just feels like secrets might be broken fundamentally if we think about this model. Because like the other aspects, I guess, of secrets is there's some kind of redaction. You can't just like grab it out of the config. In which case, if you embed a secret into a resource, then it has to be like treated just like a secret resource, which I think there's like special handling to make sure that doesn't, at least people can audit that secrets are not readable. So it's like if you don't trust the controller to read secrets, then giving it secrets also feels weird, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's just that certain customer base that is, very security conscious, and so when it comes to secrets, it's like, how can we reduce that exposure as much as possible?
So,
and this was, this was a solution that we came up with, and I'm not sure if Micaiah's on. I mean, Micaiah, you've got a lot of background on this topic. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I wonder, like, for example, like, let's say the user embeds the secret in the route. So basically it's like literally handing, I'm just trying to figure out, like, let's say there was some other entity that you had to pass through to get the secret somehow. I'm just trying to.
Yeah.
Really API level, though. I mean, to me, it seems like in certain cases I've seen where customers have had like isolation concerns and they run a dedicated controller, hardware, whatever it might be. And I'm curious, and sorry, I kind of cut you off, but curious if any of those types of approaches came up, meaning like theoretically a controller could be per namespace, and then that way the secrets controller. Obviously, there's overhead there, but security is your main concern, and
And that's consistent with like the first piece of feedback that I provided of saying, hey, lock the gateway down to a particular namespace, only allow routes of the same namespace, and then now you're just having multiple controllers, one per namespace that you want this functionality in. And so that's an option, but obviously,
I didn't go over.
Well, it's not necessarily it didn't go over well. It's just, when you come from the world that we see here, where it's like, okay, we could just have that in the route itself. It's just the perspective that Clayton and others that have an interest in what we're doing. It's just their perspective of things. And so, locking it down per namespace, running a controller per namespace, that could be the workaround. I just, I want to just bring it up for discussion and see where we go.
Yeah, I do wonder though, like wouldn't that make the route equivalent to a secret from a security standpoint?
Oh yeah, just having the TLS assets in the route itself. Is that
yes?
Yeah, pretty much, right?
Like for example, I know like going through security evaluations, we treat secrets separately, and if you have to deal with them or copy them around, then that's like a in of itself like a different level of scrutiny. So then it would kind of bring route into that level of scrutiny. It just feels like secrets are a little bit strange when referenced across namespaces, because the controller that has the permission to read them must be trusted. And if you don't trust it, then you just can't do it.
So having, I put in this comment like it's definitely a workaround and not a fix to the problem, but having just a single gateway in the cluster and configuring TLS only on the gateway, is that not an option?
But that gateway controller needs to be able to read those secrets across the
No, so you configure TLS on listeners inside the gateway resource, right? So you have a special namespace in which you put the gateway on all the TLS secrets, certificate and private keys in a specific namespace, and then you configure the gateway to target the namespaces you want it to, right? And now all of your secrets are present in that specific namespace, right? So and the controller can have only read access to secrets on the namespace in which the gateway resource exists. Your routes now could be in.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And then the routes can exist in any other namespaces, and you don't configure TLS on any of the routes.
And then developers would just need to coordinate with the infrastructure admin to say, add this secret to the gateway for my route that I'm creating.
For a new host name. So if they have a new host name and that is not covered by existing TLS configuration, then yes. But in that case, we solve the problem of read access needs to be in a specific namespace in which the gateway resource exists.
I also am curious about the recursive problem. Okay, so you push secrets into routes, so everyone has secrets in routes, and then you have a gateway controller that has to watch routes in every namespace. And then doesn't it then get access to all the secrets again?
Just the ones it's supposed to have access to.
Well, no, because there could be other routes that aren't intended for that gateway.
That's true. But you would be able to deploy a gateway controller with RBAC specific to your use case to say either it can read all secrets in the cluster if that's, or I mean all route objects in the cluster if that's, if you want to have one ingress controller for the whole cluster, or give it just access to all secrets with a namespace, and that should let it still watch those secrets or watch those routes, sorry.
Yeah, but I think that's not the problem we have at hand, right? We have the specific problem when we have an ingress control for the cluster and routes are spread across namespaces. So going back, Daniel, is that a workaround that you explored when you're discussing internally at Red Hat?
No, I appreciate you bringing that up. And so that's going to be one more piece of feedback that I provide where, as you mentioned, just the TLS configuration is only on the gateway, not on the routes. Any new routes that use a different host name that require TLS, go ahead and the developer would need to coordinate with the infrastructure admin and add those TLS assets to the gateway.
Yeah, and I do acknowledge, like, there's a limitation where now you can't have TLS config on the route resource, but I think it's a good limitation, especially in this model if you have, you're security conscious, so have self-service enabled, right? In that case, having TLS config on gateway and a single namespace is probably the best for you, right? Like auditing also becomes easier for the customer.
No, it seems like a reasonable workaround, and I think security sensitive users are accustomed to having to jump through an extra hoop or two. It's just accepted as for the additional security, and so I appreciate that feedback. And
yeah, likewise, it's an interesting use case. It almost helps you to like group infra admins too, almost as like a consequence, with that special access.
Yeah, that makes sense. I missed this. I don't think there's an issue quite yet for this one. Danian, do you mind raising an issue just so we don't lose track of this comment? I definitely feels like it needs a little bit more discussion.
Yeah, and I know it came up before. Looks like issue 103.
Okay.
Yeah, it almost feels like specific to secret management and sort of it's surfacing here, but sort of having it baked into the API feels like it's solving it in aspect of secret management that is difficult, which is basically sharing specific secrets across namespaces. And it wouldn't just be a gateway issue.
Yeah. Yeah, and just go ahead.
It is an acute problem with ingress though, where you really don't want the same thing that's communicating with clients outside the cluster to have access to read any secret in the cluster.
Right, you want some DMZ secret store that is only containing secrets that like people nominate to basically be less secure.
Yeah, and I think that leads into one of the ideas that's been discussed in this issue, which is to have a controller that just synchronizes secrets that has access to read secrets anywhere in the cluster and synchronizes them to some namespace that the gateway controller could then use. So you have privilege separation.
Yeah, like that is exactly where my mind jumped to, because it's almost like you decouple those two problems.
That's actually essentially how we handle ingress in OpenShift. We translate ingress plus secret to a route object.
I see, and the route objects are privileged objects. My concern is like if you start having secret material in multiple API resources, then they all end up in the same category as secrets, which need to be closely guarded, and you shouldn't watch across namespaces or have permission to read. And at that point, it's like you just kick the problem up one level.
There are several problems that it does solve, though. I mean, I suppose there are shortcomings, but it does mean you're not granting your ingress controller access to unrelated secrets that aren't related to ingress. And it means you have all your ingress related certificates, they're in a specific resource. So it's easier to write the RBAC policy you want specific to those secrets, so to speak, or those objects.
Now, is there ever a time where you want to differentiate between users that might just want to modify a route, say add a path to a route, versus users that should have access to TLS and specifically the certificate involved? It just that seems like something like that would be difficult to solve if the certificate was included in the route, if I'm understanding this correctly.
Right, that is a use case we don't handle very well with the route API in OpenShift. And that's one advantage of this separation you have with service APIs, where you have the gateway, which can have TLS config, or you can allow specifying that TLS config on the HTTP route and choose when you create the gateway whether or not you'll allow that sort of route specific TLS config. So service
Right.
APIs has a nice solution to that, a nice answer to both of those use cases.
Yeah, that makes sense. Very interesting. Okay. Well, I want to make sure we have time for some of the last things on our agenda, but I'm definitely interested in further discussion on this. If you happen to get any more internal feedback, it would be really helpful to see what that looks like, and maybe an issue here on this repo, just so we can continue to discuss.
Yeah,
different
Rob, I'll
options
take
here.
it as an action item to create a new issue, XREF 103, and just try to summarize this comment from 103 in as kind of the description of the new issue, so that we don't lose
Great.
track of it.
Great, thanks. All right, we'll keep on moving here. At this point, I wanted to just make sure we were on the same path for V1 Alpha 1 launch. We have set a date which is 7 days away now. That would be launched no later than V1 Alpha 1. So I wanted to make sure that everyone here was, agreeing with the date, but also the process involved. And right now, this process is very manual, and there's certainly lots of room for improvement. But the process I've used for the 2 RCs before this is to submit a changelog PR, wait for approval. Once that's merged, tag that commit with v0.1.0 and launch a GitHub release based on that. I think that's a reasonable approach, but I wanted to see if we wanted to formalize who exactly needs to approve this. Do we want, so let's say I make a PR, or anyway, do we want more than one other maintainer to approve it? Do we want a larger consensus than that because it's kind of a release triggering PR or commit? Or are we comfortable with one other approver? Should we formalize this anymore?
Does anyone have experience on how this is handled by other projects?
No.
Why don't we
That's-
just do it live?
Yeah. So
Yeah, like
that
Lily
that was
Carter.
going to be my. I think I am kind of leaning towards that. It's not a particularly, obviously if I had the changelog PR queued up and it was generally agreed upon in time for office hours next week, I think it would be relatively straightforward to just launch a release based on that, and do it all live. Have a V1 Alpha 1 launch party, and
Yeah, I
you
like
can
that idea.
see. Okay. And we can make all our mistakes live together. But yes. Yeah. Okay. I'll plan on that then. I'll try and have a PR ready no later than Tuesday then with the change log. And if others are able to make any comments or feedback by then, that would be ideal. So I'm not also editing that PR live as we go. But otherwise, I think it'd be fun to actually launch that live during office hours. So cool. All right, the next one is pretty straightforward, and this is I have a gatekeeper example, and I got general, good feedback from one of the maintainers on that side, but they're still trying to figure out where this might fit in, which I think is very reasonable. I can follow up with them, but I don't want to rush them to figuring this out. This is a relatively new project anyways, the Gatekeeper library. And so they're trying to figure out where, examples like this actually belong. In the meantime, I'm curious what we want to do with that. There's nothing that says that we have to have any kind of example like this in our own repository. We could simply add as a stopgap link to this PR in our documentation, or we could actually hoist everything from this PR and add it locally into our own repo and maintain it ourselves. Does anyone have a strong feeling on how we go forward with any kind of gatekeeper examples?
I mean, I'm in favor of option one and just referencing this PR as a stopgap.
Yeah.
I think long-term, if we don't have to support it, it'd be great.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where my mind's at.
Yeah, I agree with that. It doesn't, it sounds like they're very open to fitting this into their repository. So even if we did move it into our repo, it would be a short-term thing, I think. So as long as we're fine with, linking to a PR in our docs, which I think seems reasonable enough at this stage, I'll make a PR to update our docs just to reference this for the time being. I imagine it'll take them a bit to figure out exactly how this fits, but they seem open to it. So cool. The next one is more of just a, just keeping up with things. We probably have more meetings than we need. At this point, we're doing 2 meetings a week, and I think we're at a point, at least once we hit this V1 Alpha 1 phase, and especially as we start to move into holidays, where we can probably bump our meeting cadence down. I'm thinking probably once a week is probably sufficient going forward, at least post V1 Alpha 1. But with that said, I wanted to check with the group here. Is there well, first I should ask, are we fine with going down to a single weekly meeting? And if so, do we have a preference on time? Of the times we're currently having meetings, is there one that's especially bad?
Rob, I think you should send it out on Sig Network mailing list, by the way.
Yeah, I will. But want to be inclusive of the people here too, and make sure that we're not choosing a time that's going to inconvenience any of the maintainers that are already contributing.
Yeah, I mean, the times work fine for me and I'm flexible, but I do agree that we're at a state to kind of cut back to once a week. And then
Yeah.
we can readdress the topic if we feel like after the holidays, maybe into the spring, that it's like, okay, you know, if we feel like we need to ramp up again, but
Yeah.
otherwise the times are flexible and everything else is
Yeah,
good.
agreed. I can see us wanting to ramp back up as we start to push towards V1 Alpha 2 or V1 Beta or whatever our next API release is. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think for now, a once weekly, bumping down to once weekly after we release is probably reasonable. I'll think a bit more about exactly how I ask people on Sig Network. I know there's a variety of different tools out there that allow you to kind of mark which times you're actually available or vote on times. So I may try and do something like that and send it out to Sig Network, but need to do a little bit more research. Yeah. Anything else to say on meeting times? All right. Let me keep on going then. It looks like we have one PR that needs, oh yes, it does need a final LGTM. Thanks, Harry. I added an approve on this short name PR. This is a really tiny PR. I think it adds some value. Short name for backend policy would be BP. Harry chose the longer names, well, based on lots of feedback and discussion, so as not to at least initially collide with Istio's gateway short name, and we can revisit in the future. And for gateway class, GC. I think these are reasonable starting points. I tried to look briefly for any other common resources that might collide with these, and I couldn't find any. That doesn't mean they don't exist. But if anyone has the time, this is PR 426. I've approved this. I just wanted someone else to sanity check this for a final LGTM. But yeah.
As I'm looking at it, it's just a couple quick questions. Sorry, Rob, but
yeah.
is it common for a resource to have multiple short names? I see gateway is GTW and GTWY.
Yeah, I think there are at least, I don't remember, there are resources which have multiple common short names in core itself.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. I can't think of a good example right now, but I'm pretty sure I've seen it before.
Does the generated CRD look reasonable? Does
yeah,
it have like,
yeah,
okay,
yeah. So that.
And are we not using GW because that's already taken by Istio or something like that?
Yeah, that I was the one who initially pushed back on that. The rationale was if we're going to overlap with Istio, we can at least give them one unique way to still reference their gateway resource, because apparently when we deploy into a cluster, we get precedence over Istio, like just the gateway name. And so if we also took their short name, that would feel especially cruel. I don't know. So at least for now.
I thought it's like arbitrary which one took precedence. Is it really that we always take precedence?
That is what John has observed, but I have not tested this myself.
Interesting. I don't know why. Like, why would it be?
Yeah, I don't know.
It looks like you can have multiple short names. I just did a kind cluster. Is CRD is one has CRD and CRDs. Solicited.
Oh, that makes sense.
To me, that multiple names seems more consistent, right? I kind of like having a single, I mean, like if we had multiple gateways, like let's say with Istio side, like GW and GWS, like, okay, you know, kind of the plural short name is basically what you gave in that example.
Yeah, it does seem strange to have like two different spellings
Yeah.
on second look. Yeah.
And then I guess the other thing that stands out to me is, Harry, is there a reason why the short name for backend policy and gateway class is quoted, but the two short names for gateway is not?
No, I don't think so. There would be a reason. I can code those. I made the change and I was trying to figure out how to actually get the right syntax for specifying multiple short names. I think in that process I removed the quotes.
Yeah, just for consistency. And I don't know what other people think. I don't know if I'm making maybe a bigger issue out of this. Is I would actually prefer just a single short name. And then if we get to a point where we get feedback from users of like, wow, this short name really stinks. All right, then let's fix it, as opposed to having multiple short names.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I don't mind either of these short names. I don't feel too strongly on this one. I just wanted to avoid another conflict here. With that said, does anyone have a preference if we had to choose between either of these short names for gateway?
I'd really like for it to be GW. I know that we're not
I
trying
know.
to fall back.
I know.
I'm wondering
I-
if in a year we look and say, no one's using Istio anymore, everyone's happily using our gateway resource. If there's a point where we can say the Istio gateway resource is deprecated, would we then add that GW short name?
I think so. I think, and obviously, John has been involved. I think they're working on using our API where they can for like ingress, or at least supporting it. So maybe that is a thing that comes in the future where we can say, okay, this is not used enough. Let's just take it all.
Yeah,
but at least
I wouldn't. I don't know if we should spend too much time on this, because there is a possibility we may end up renaming this anyways. So I think as long as we're sufficiently happy, let's just merge this.
Yeah. From that perspective, I guess Bowie, I've been commenting on it, but I'm sufficiently happy enough with it, even as is, here this round. But
Also, we can test out how this multi-name thing works.
yeah, I'm fine. Danian, do you have a preference between GTW and the longer GTWY?
Not a strong preference. I mean, as I look at them, maybe I lean a little bit more towards GTWY.
Yeah.
But I don't really have a strong preference for one over the other.
Yeah, that is my slight preference.
Part of the reason I asked about whether we might later add GW is that implies later we'll have multiple short names anyway.
That's fair. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah.
I would say go with one. We don't have to have multiple, because removing them probably is sort of like deprecating something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Harry,
I'd
do you
say-
mind being consistent with the quoting, and let's just roll with GTWY as a single short name, and then ping me on Slack and I'll tag it.
Sounds good.
Cool. Great.
GTW can be typed with just your left hand on a QWERTY keyboard.
Uh-oh.
I noticed
Are
that
we
Helmut
sure?
did the same thing.
All right, GTW, I'm fine with it. Go with GTW.
Sure.
Anyways, just
But yeah,
pick one,
Harry.
Harry, and I think it's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Harry, just ping me on Slack and I'll tag it.
Okay, I'm tossing a coin.
Sounds fair.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we're a bit past time. I think there's a little bit more in PR and issue triage that we can go through tomorrow, but otherwise, this has been really helpful. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Talk to you later.